Audio check 1 2 3. Hey guys, Kevin Schulteis here for Watchman Witness. Today we are actually going to kind of do something I'm impressed with. It's not all negative news sometimes, but it also is very interesting. We're going to talk about Alberta and the fact that their COVID numbers, as you see here, I'm going to look at here momentarily, is they you hear it all the time or a lot if you're paying attention. It's not everything is COVID deaths left, right, and center. Some of things, a lot of complications happen. A, when you're older. Two, is when you have these things. I didn't even know the word, but comorbidities or something. What's the word? Yeah, we'll look into that shortly here. But there's what is it? Pre-existing conditions or comorbidities or something like that, and we're going to talk about that. Alberta reports it, which is really amazing. Is a ton of people have been demanding this kind of information. I didn't know this is one of the best government websites I think I've ever seen in my life. Normally, government websites are boring, very uninspiring. Functionally, maybe they're okay in terms of the data, but this has a ton of data in graphical format and is simple to use and visually appealing. Top notch marks for whoever designed this website. Congratulations. One of the few government websites in the world that is halfway decent anyways. So these numbers actually, and these are all real-time, I guess, statistics of Alberta, anywhere from new cases to everything else like that. So here, let me just switch to a bigger screen. But kind of the point is the reason why I was going into this is, hang on. The reason why I was going into praising Alberta's site, because I ran into this a couple nights ago and I'm like, wow, pretty darn impressive, is because like a week or two ago or something like that, Hinshaw made a big stink about this big 14-year-old Alberta boy dying of COVID. Like, oh my goodness, like, and it shocked the world, and it's scare, right? We've been kind of used to that if you pay anything to the media. Unfortunately, that's bought and paid for by our Canadian Liberal government. So you can't trust much of that, but their job is to scare tactics, and rightfully so, I suppose. It gets people's attention. I know it's a marketing strategy. But the family came out right and said he did not die of COVID. The kid was dying, and he was on his last few days of cancer and everything else, and he contracted, I guess, COVID in the hospital or something. In his final couple of days, he tests positive, and now all of a sudden he's a massive 14-year-old COVID death. Scare. And yeah, it's disingenuous, and the family just went out on a tirade, and then Hinshaw, I guess, kind of apologized a little bit, said, oops, sorry, he died, of cancer, and he just happened to have COVID, right? But this story brings up stuff that we've been discussing for a year and a half now, is the inflated COVID numbers, and in fact, it was actually very interesting because Alberta even did the opposite. Or I think I made a video of it where Alberta said, or they went on record of saying, if you don't, what is it? If you go to the hospital or something happens, or no, if you don't go to work, if you show up, or if you register to work, like staying home from being sick, and you don't get a COVID test saying you're negative COVID, they're automatically going to apply every person that's sick, and they're going to classify it as a COVID sickness. And you're like, what the heck? I stayed home because I'm sick. Maybe I got a hangover for a few days and don't want you to know, or the flu, or just regular flu, some kind of bug or something, like, a little while ago I got sniffles for a few days. It was so fun. I literally get sniffles for like 24 hours and runny nose and everything for 24 hours after getting my first COVID test. And I'm like, if they gave me COVID, I was literally pissed. But, would I call that, if I stayed home from a few days, because, back in the old days, if you used to go, you'd be called a pussy and a baby and everything else if you were runny nose and everything, and you didn't go to work. they'd be like, what, are you dying? Like, you're not dead, show up to work. Now it'd be kind of taboo if you're sniffling and blowing your nose all the time and you're at work with your colleagues and stuff. Times have changed now, probably post-COVID or mid-COVID here. So yeah, so Alberta's gone. I think it was Alberta. I'm pretty darn sure it was Alberta said if you don't get tested and you're off of work because of sick, we're going to classify all of those as COVID to inflate our numbers. They wanted to have inflated COVID numbers. So that was questionable. And that was actually an official statement put out, and it pissed me off. I should have called that up on this particular video. Number two is now this big story. And like so many people are like, well, maybe Alberta shouldn't be talking about comorbidities and stuff. Like they're giving people too much information, right? And there can almost be no such thing. So let's go to this. Too much information. And what's interesting is if you look at the thing people say, and the reason I bring this up, I was going to make a video of this like a couple days ago, and then this morning or last night or something, I hear like Colin Powell died here, right? And the fact that not all the sites are saying like he died of COVID and stuff like that. A lot of them are doing halfway decent, saying complications from COVID. But the whole point is they're really pushing the COVID narrative. That being said, the guy is 84. They only give a less than one paragraph about his issues, because right now the information is a little light. The family was the one that posted something on the official Facebook page, which who's to say how much that is vetted and or scripted. But he died of COVID. But the guy was 84 years old, tons of cancer, Parkinson's disease, and a bunch of other stuff. I don't think he had much time left. And yes, he was fully vaccinated and everything. And then they start, all the narratives come out. Oh, wait. Just because you're fully vaccinated doesn't mean the vaccinations don't work and everything else like that. And they're kind of playing that narrative. And then now they're going to use this as a narrative for booster shots. Oh, he was fully vaccinated, but maybe it's falling apart, so we need boosters. Everybody needs boosters. So you just watch that narrative as well, okay? And the other thing too is, and that's a whole nother story. So we'll get into that shortly. But Alberta's statistics are actually covering, I think, 17 different pre-existing conditions, and I like how they say that, pre-existing conditions, which is interesting. Because the whole point is like, man, statistically, this is a very relatively, compared to almost any other virus out there, COVID-19, there's a ton of other things that kill a million times worse than COVID-19. And then on top of that, those that it affects and those that it affects more harshly is very skewed typically to the very old. Everybody else is pretty darn safe. And you can look at the statistics and the age brackets. And Alberta's website actually does an amazing job of cases and vaccinations and outcomes. And they break down, I don't know where it was, but they break down a ton of stuff, right? Geography, all kinds of stuff, which is really quite amazing. And then they let you export the data and everything. I'm like, wow, it's pretty darn amazing. Yeah, see these kind of like brackets and stuff like that, active cases or something, or whatever. So pre-existing conditions, this is what we're talking about. Heart issues, hypertension, I guess that's like blood pressure and stuff like that. Respiratory issues, of course, that's a huge one. If you already got respiratory issues and things like the COVID type viruses and other viruses, definitely affect your nasal, your head, and your lung and your breathing capacity. So of course that's a big issue. Diabetes, like, oh my goodness, like nobody's talking about how many people are dying of diabetes all the time, and yet that's a huge killer in Canada and stuff like that. And they don't talk about, and even like that's interesting that they're tracking dementia. Cancers, 1 in 2 Canadians, right, are dying of cancer and stuff like that. Crazy. Strokes, of course, heart issues, liver and immune deficiencies. which is really interesting, right? And if you look at the statistics, of course, passing away is huge. The more issues you have, man, like, of course you're going to have death is going to be way more an issue the more issues you have. So this is 3 or more conditions, right? And yet non-severe is barely any deaths. The rate is super small with COVID. If you're pretty healthy, then you're going to be able to deal with things. And this particular chart includes young to old, right? It doesn't include, like, if you eliminated the upper end age brackets and then did this chart again, that'd be interesting to take a look at. But yeah, when you have a higher percentage, of course, you pass away, they're going to count it as COVID death. But then, like, this is like Colin Powell and stuff like that right now, is he would be in this, he would have a huge list of multiple conditions. Yes, including, like, if you're like above the average age of death by a few years, I would consider that almost a condition as well. Hey, this person died. Well, what condition? Oh, he was 90. Well, okay, yeah, like, holy moly, like, congratulations. Sorry for your loss, but wow, 90 years old. That's quite amazing that we've had that person that long. Good on them, and lucky for us to have them around that long, right? And sorry for your loss, right? But still, 90, if the average age, I think in Canada is around 81, 82, male, female, somewhere in there, give or take there. And I'm like, hey, if you're 84 years old, probably the number one condition. And I remember hearing, I don't remember if I was watching lots of Norm Macdonald recently, because of course he's passed away just recently. And I think he was, he was a comedian that really was able to poke at really obvious things, but kind of make fun of it too and stuff. Like, it's like, hey, number one leading cause of death, that person, 90-year-old person, what was his cause of death? Well, he was 90, or whatever. Like, and I know he made light of it and stuff like that, but like, it you got to take into that consideration. Now, another thing too is, like, man, going to the hospitals is so dangerous, and when people, they're not registering and making news of, hey, somebody died of diabetes or somebody died of obesity. Man, I am really surprised they are not tracking overweight and obesity on this chart. Actually, that I believe some of the statistics that some of the states have been tracking and stuff like that, that's a huge one, obesity. But like, obesity does, if you got hypertension, that's probably like an automatic or something like that, hypertension and stuff. And you probably got heart issues potentially, and stroke if you're obese. But they don't make big deals of people dying of complications of obesity and some of these other things. But either way, that being said, I just wanted to bring this up. This is an amazing resource of, all kinds of things COVID related. And you can build some very interesting, if you look at the science on a whole bunch of these things, and then compare that to all the narratives that the news has been pumping you, and you even compare it to some of the data, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Let's look at the science. They always say, let's look at the science. And then you look at the science. I have to admit that Alberta actually put this out. And then actually, in light of that, it's like really funny, because in light of that, I think some companies are like, oh, wait, maybe Alberta shouldn't be, they wanted the family wanted the truth to come out about this family, saying, he died from cancer, not COVID. And then they're kind of making some of these websites, Global and CTV and CBC and stuff like that, they're making the case that maybe they shouldn't less transparency. What? Like, yeah, really. Let's here we have a website, an Alberta website, a government website, actually doing halfway decent transparency, giving us at least statistics. Like, a year and a half ago, I don't think they give statistics this publicly until COVID came out in fairly real time of any other cases and stuff like that. That's almost like once a year you go to like Canada's census or something, statistics or stats can or something like that, and you check that out. And check out the cancer rates and this. But I don't even think they went into that much detail. And I do know that this is kind of becoming big data, and manipulating data and tracking data is actually a big thing. Because there's a saying in the sales world where you can't expect what you don't inspect. You can't expect big business, good growth, good profit, good whatever, if you're not inspecting your business, if you're not tweaking your numbers, if you're not, in analytics in the world of websites and ads and stuff, if you don't A/B test stuff, you don't know which ad works better than the other, if you're not tracking the data, if you're spending thousands of dollars on Yellow Page ads, getting a few phone calls, and then you keep spending thousands of dollars on Yellow Page ads thinking it's working, you probably got a thing coming if you're not tracking it. It might be, but if you don't know where your data, if you don't follow the data to proper conclusions, and then of course you can manipulate and take out, and just like anything, you can take anything out of context and make whatever you want to say what it wants to say, right, to your narrative. So you got to be a little careful and take everything with a grain of salt, much like our media. So that being said, guys, I just want to say congratulations on Alberta for having such a great website. You can just Google Alberta COVID-19 here. You can just, let's see here. You can just Google, all I did was just Google Alberta COVID-19, scroll down, get to the Alberta COVID page, and then I'm like, oh, this wasn't the page I wanted. It kind of seemed like, oh, this is just some of the boring numbers. And I'm like, where was that? And then I had to click interactive data app. They're calling it the data app. And then that's what looked a lot better. It's interactive, and you can scroll around, and you can do lots of things, right? And that's where I found the pre-existing conditions, and you can scroll over and get every little number. Yes, you can look at charts if you want, but at the same time, you can what's interesting, another thing about Alberta's website, which is really interesting, they actually still break it down into the location. They're calling it the UK variant, and the Indian variant, and the Brazilian, and the South African, instead of Alpha, Beta, Charlie, whatever, Delta. Big one's Delta variant, right? Instead of tracking it by the Delta variant, which I think is the Indian. I remember making fun of the B117 UK variant, because that's it kind of reminded me of the combination of the bombers, the B117, there's the B1B bomber or whatever, and then the B17 bomber, I think. So I was combining the B117 bomber virus back in the day. I think that was one of the first variants, I don't think that was the original, but the original Wuhan virus, right? So I'm really, that's the one thing about the Alberta website that caught me off guard. For being a government website and on the ball and trying to direct the right narrative, I'm kind of surprised they didn't immediately switch that over to Alpha and Delta variants and stuff like that, right? So anyways, I just thought I'd bring that little funny tidbit up, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, you got to be careful with the narrative of what the media wants. Somebody dies of COVID and stuff. You want to know what there's a huge amount. I would love to have every death that had COVID, that had pre-existing conditions, see where the actual cause of death came from. You can die with COVID, but that doesn't necessarily mean you died from COVID. So you got to take all of those numbers from the last year and a half with a grain of salt. And it's funny that they track the flu and other things season to season. To try to have scary numbers, they're not calling this seasons of COVID. They're like, oh, just to have scary numbers, all the COVID numbers, this giant tallying up, tallying and tallying and tallying and tallying. And, they usually are huge on when provinces or states have, a big percentage increase, a double digit increase, 12% increase in COVID numbers. They're whatever. But they don't talk about states or Alberta and stuff like that that's happening right now that our COVID numbers are definitely way down. But they don't like to usually bring that up either. So you got to read between the lines. And heck, if Alberta's giving you the data, I wish every country, every province or whatever would give data. Maybe every province does. Maybe. I don't think so. I think Alberta's a little bit more open on that, I would like to think. And if not, well, hopefully the other provinces will follow suit and give all their transparent data. And then number two is you got to be careful of the media, read between the lines. And then when they say they're following science, I'd love, how many times I flipped it and say, the science. If you want to lock down, if you want to be careful, they're segregating the entire countries. They're abusing military and government emergency powers for the last year and a half. Provinces and Canada and stuff and states, they're abusing that. Should never even happen. That shouldn't even be a thing in a time of war. And here they're blowing this out of proportion, not following the science. They're locking people down, segregating people. And you're like, well, hey, let's look at the science. Let's look at the deaths of go to Alberta's website, their statistics. Let's look at the deaths and which people groups are the vulnerable. And then let's spend our money protecting the vulnerable. The outliers and stuff like that, sure, general caution, lots of advertising, try to change our opinions, and companies can kind of do what they want, but let people be free. And that's unfortunate. In a few days, yesterday, a friend went to take me out to just breakfast or something, and I'd totally forgotten that a few days, I think a week or two ago, Nova Scotia kicked in our vaccine passport, and segregating people, right? I thought we were done with that hundreds of years ago, but we're back to segregating people now, haves and have nots, and upper class and lower class, things like that. So we're segregating people, unfortunately, around their paper. You got to be up to date with the government with your paper. If you're not registered with the government to be able to be tracked, every location, your name, your number, show your paper every single time, both your private health status and your identification. So that's two sets of papers that they're breaking both private health issues, and they're tracking you with your government ID and stuff like that. And this is just the start of it. Wait until everything's so much more systematized with the phone and whatnot. But that being said, yesterday was the first time that literally friend takes me out for breakfast. I didn't think about it. I'm like, oh, buddy, I'm protesting this, right? I'm not allowed to have breakfast with you. And he's like, no, they're not going to track that in Nova Scotia. They don't do it in Yarmouth. Nobody's checked us in Yarmouth or whatever and stuff like that. Sure enough, they denied us, both me and him, at the door. He had his stuff. He didn't have data on his phone or something. They cut him off the day before, and he didn't have data on his phone. Couldn't go in. So already the segregation has happened, and we got to stand up against it. And unfortunately, most people are getting vaccinated, and they're going to fall in line like sheep, sadly. And it makes it tougher to have any integrity in fighting things like this. We gotta make a stand and not be for segregating people, not be for sharing private information, not for tracking people, not for showing papers, not for limiting access to free economics. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, and in a few days, I will now be stripped of my Canadian charter rights of free travel also in Canada, and I will not be able to go back home, back to Alberta anymore, which is unfortunately via plane or train and a public device. So they've limited economics, they've limited travel, they segregated people, they track people with their private information and also their government IDs, and making everybody register and show their papers at every show their papers and their mark. Show your mark, show your QR code, and yeah, it's a little unfortunate. Okay, guys, that's that for Watchman and Witness, and yeah, keep Canada in prayer. We for sure need it. This is never going to end, unfortunately, but we can stand against the tide. We can be a strong witness or like a watchman to these things. Inform other people that this stuff is going on. Inform yourself, be informed yourself, and inform your colleagues. If a buddy warns you on the wall that the enemy is coming, your job is to also inform others. If they don't react, that's their fault. But at the same time, as a witness, you give good information and you give solutions to the bad problems out there. And that's what we are supposed to do. And we pray for our leaders, pray for ourselves, make sure we stay vigilant ourselves, stay strong in the word, in the Lord, and prepare for these times. Get to know your stuff, equip up, and serve others, and make sure you spread the good news.